Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Think about this. In just 6 years, the entire world was literally broken apart and rebuilt. Today, we're taking on a truly monumental task. We're going to unpack the events, the staggering scale, and the lasting consequences of the deadliest conflict in human history, World War II. It was a war that spanned continents and oceans, displaced entire populations, and fundamentally altered the trajectory of the modern world.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The road to war. 2. The Axis advance. 3. Turning the tide. 4. Defeat and destruction. And finally, 5. A new world order. Let's get started.
Section 1. The road to war. The roots of the conflict. You know, a conflict of this absolute magnitude, it doesn't just start on a random Tuesday morning. The roots actually stretch all the way back to the economic ruin and political instability left by the First World War. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, it completely shattered confidence in democratic governments worldwide. In Germany, this intense economic despair created a massive opening for extremist political movements. By 1933, Adolf Hitler became chancellor. He was promising a huge national revival, but at the exact same time he was dismantling democracy, targeting minorities, and illegally rearming the military. And despite attempts by Britain and France to appease him, like just handing over the Sudetenland, the momentum of aggression kept building. It all culminated in the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939, where Germany and the Soviet Union literally agreed to carve up Eastern Europe between them.
So by the late 1930s, the whole international system is just fracturing, and it's being driven by 3 major powers looking to aggressively expand. You've got Germany pushing across Europe, fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini expanding into the Mediterranean and Africa, and Japan aggressively pushing into East Asia. And look, the reality of these campaigns was absolutely brutal. Take Japan, for instance. They launched a full-scale war against China in 1937, which led to the Nanjing Massacre, a horrific episode of widespread atrocities against civilians and prisoners of war. Basically, the stage for a massive global showdown was completely set.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Axis advance. The invasion begins.
That whole illusion of appeasement? It shattered for good on September 1st, 1939. And this brilliantly illustrates how warfare had changed. When German tanks rolled into Poland, they weren't using the slow, static trench warfare from World War I. No, they used Blitzkrieg, literally lightning war. It was this rapid, overwhelming combination of tanks, aircraft, artillery, and fast-moving ground troops. It was devastating. They defeated Poland in a matter of weeks, and it was this exact invasion that finally pushed Britain and France to officially declare war.
But Poland was really just the opening act. In a shocking sequence of events in 1940, Germany pivoted west. They took Denmark and Norway, then pushed right into Belgium and the Netherlands. Now, the French thought they were safe behind their heavily fortified Maginot Line, but actually, German forces completely blindsided them by pushing right through the dense, difficult terrain of the Ardennes forest. The collapse was stunning. Hundreds of thousands of trapped British and French troops had to pull off this desperate evacuation across the Channel from Dunkirk. Paris fell, France signed an armistice, and Britain? Well, they were left largely alone in Western Europe, enduring the relentless aerial bombings of the Blitz, while Hitler set his sights elsewhere.
Because Hitler had a much larger plan in mind. On June 22, 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. And we need to be clear here, this wasn't your standard military campaign. This was a ruthless, ideological, and racial war. The scale of the Eastern Front was just staggering, and the brutality was off the charts. Mobile killing units known as Einsatzgruppen followed the advancing army, carrying out mass executions of Jewish communities and causing the deaths of millions of Soviet civilians and prisoners of war.
While the war raged on the battlefields, the Nazi regime systematically developed a program of mass murder across Europe. The Holocaust resulted in the genocide of approximately 6 million European Jews. The killing system utilized government institutions, police forces, military units, and purpose-built extermination camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, where victims were transported by train and murdered in gas chambers. Millions of others, including Roma and Sinti people, Soviet prisoners of war, people with disabilities, and political opponents, were also systematically targeted and murdered by the regime. While Europe was engulfed in all this devastation, an event happened that would fundamentally change the entire scope of the war. On December 7, 1941, Japanese forces attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Instantly, the United States was dragged into the conflict, and just days later, Germany and Italy formally declared war on the US. So, what started as a series of regional expansions had suddenly merged into a truly global war.
Moving on to Section 3, Turning the Tide. The balance shifts.
So the crucial point here is that while the Axis powers now control these enormous chunks of territory, they have made one monumental strategic mistake. They picked a fight with a coalition of the world's largest industrial powers. Think about it. When you stack the increasingly overstretched Axis territories against the combined might of the Allies, Britain, the USSR, the USA, and China, the math totally shifts. America had this unbelievable industrial capacity. The Soviet Union had seemingly endless manpower and massive strategic depth. Britain controlled vital global sea routes, and China was tying down huge Japanese armies despite taking staggering losses. The balance was absolutely shifting.
And that massive industrial disadvantage, it caught up with the Axis fast. In the span of just about 1 year, they suffered a series of devastating blows. In June 1942, American forces sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway. That severely crippled Japan's naval offensive. Then by November, British forces handed General Rommel's army a huge defeat at El Alamein in North Africa. But the most catastrophic loss for Germany? That came in February 1943 at Stalingrad. After months of this brutal, room-by-room, street-by-street fighting, Soviet forces surrounded and captured a massive German army. That incredible victory shifted the momentum on the Eastern Front for good.
And that brings us to Section 4, Defeat and Destruction. The Long Retreat.
From this point onward, the war essentially became one long, incredibly bloody retreat for the Axis. To finally break Germany's grip on Western Europe, the Allies launched the largest amphibious invasion in human history on June 6, 1944, D-Day. Supported by an absolute armada of naval and air forces, American, British, Canadian, and other Allied troops fought fiercely to establish a bridgehead on the beaches of Normandy. And the immense gamble worked. Paris was liberated by August. Suddenly, the German army was caught in a massive vice, crushed by the Western Allies from the west and the unstoppable Soviet Red Army pouring in from the east.
Despite a final desperate German counterattack, which you probably know as the Battle of the Bulge, the Nazi regime was rapidly falling apart. By April 1945, Soviet troops were fighting right inside Berlin, literally turning the capital into a battlefield. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler died by suicide in his underground bunker. Shortly after that, on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Victory in Europe was finally complete.
But remember, the global war wasn't quite over yet. In the Pacific, American forces had been relentlessly advancing through an intense strategy known as island hopping. Battles at places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa saw extraordinary, determined resistance from Japanese forces, raising the terrifying prospect of a full-scale mainland invasion. Instead, the United States deployed a weapon unlike anything humanity had ever seen before. Atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th and on Nagasaki on August 9th. Concurrently, the Soviet Union launched a massive attack on Japanese forces in Manchuria. Finally, on September 2nd, 1945, Japan formally surrendered.
Which leads us into our final part, Section 5, A New World Order, the Aftermath.
So, the guns had finally fallen silent, but the world they left behind was almost unrecognizable. The sheer human cost was incomprehensible. We're talking tens of millions dead, whole cities completely flattened, and entire populations displaced. Global power was totally transformed too. The old European empires were severely weakened, which sparked these massive global decolonization movements. Meanwhile, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the two undisputed superpowers. Almost immediately, the alliance that defeated Nazi Germany fractured, dividing Europe in half and kicking off the Cold War. Trying to prevent another global catastrophe, the international community established the United Nations in 1945. And to address the unimaginable horrors committed during the war, the Nuremberg trials were set up to prosecute senior Nazi officials for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
To really grasp the true weight of this era, we have to look beyond just the battlefields. As this quote highlights, World War II was not simply a military conflict. It was a massive struggle over political systems, territory, resources, ideology, and the entire future of the international order. It was a war absolutely filled with moral complexity. It thrust humanity straight into the nuclear age and, tragically, exposed the horrifying limits of state violence. The defeat of the Axis powers undoubtedly changed the trajectory of human history. But honestly, the memory of this war continues to challenge us even today.
I want to leave you with a couple of vital questions to think about. How could democracies effectively respond to dictatorship, and how could genocide happen on such an unfathomable scale? You see, understanding this history isn't just about memorizing a bunch of dates and battles. It's about grappling with the very best and the absolute worst of human nature. It's about recognizing exactly how the world we live in today was forged in those 6 years of extraordinary violence. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history that shapes our world.